Welcome into the very first episode of Rigorous Religion Podcast. My name's Jeffrey, this is Ian, this is Tucker, and the purpose of this podcast is to take a deep dive into the things that don't normally get talked about or don't get talked about enough. And so, I also is to encourage y'all to go deep in your own study, and if we can do it and we can understand these difficult or complex topics, and so can you. And so we encourage you to, of course, do your own research and everything that we do in this podcast, but also to fact check us and tell us if you think we're wrong. But so in our first 3 episodes, 3 to maybe 4, we're going to be talking about specifically what we call rigorous religion, which is how do we get from point A to B in our own religion, what we believe. And so, of course, all 3 of us are practicing Christians today. But it's not just a faith. It's not just something that we think, okay, well, I'm a Christian, and so this is what I believe. And because I believe and I have so much faith, then it must be true. That's circular reasoning, and that doesn't make any sense. So what we're going to do for these first 3 episodes, we're going to start at the very beginning. For example, the basic idea is we can trust our senses. We can know truth. We're going to look at some scientific laws that are widely believed by just about everyone to be true. And then we're just going to go from there. And our first episode is going to get us to the point where we believe, or it makes logically sense, that there is some type of God, some type of higher being. In our second episode, we're going to narrow it down from all of the different options of what people believe this God or this higher being is, all the way down to the God of the Bible that we believe in. And then our third episode is going to be what the Bible says, and how do we get from the Bible being true, the Bible being the Word of God, all the way into what we believe, what we practice every single day.
So we're going to be doing something, as far as Christian, that I've never really seen done before. We're taking a systematic approach to Christian evidences, rather than trying to refute specific arguments. So we're going to be doing it in the form of a Euclidean proof, which is a mathematical term. Basically, we're going to start with some obviously true postulates, which are basically just obvious truths. We're going to start with 3 of those. And then we're just going to work from there, building up from those obvious truths. So I know you had something to say before we get into that.
Yeah, so I was just going to bounce off of what you said. I do think that even, among Christians, there are common, I guess you could say, fallacies of faith that I think are based in good intentions and really a desire for simplicity and for, I don't know, just something that's easy, but that's not always going to be the correct answer. And so I'm just going to point out where some of these ideas come from. So, this first one isn't really as common. Well, maybe in some ways, but I have heard genuine Christians go to places like Hebrews 11 and verse 1, where it says, now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. So that's also referred to as evidence, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So people will go to that and will be like, see, well, I have faith. This must mean that my faith is my evidence, and my faith is all the evidence I need. And, any external objective evidence is just kind of shied away from. And really, again, it's like you said, it's just circular reasoning. Mm-hmm. It's basically, I believe Christianity is true because I have faith, and I have faith because I believe Christianity is true. And I believe Christianity is true because I have faith because Christianity is true. It's just, it's just circular reasoning. And why would the same not apply to Islam, Mormonism, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc.? And so we have an intuitive understanding that objective evidence has to be the difference between one or the other. And then there's another one, and this one's a little more common, I would say, just in my own experience. And it's what I call faith first, evidence later. And basically, this kind of thinking makes faith not contingent on evidence, but simply just supported by it, I guess. And it makes evidence, I would say, more of an excuse rather than a reason for faith. And it does lead to this kind of attitude of nothing would ever convince me that I'm wrong. Why? Well, I would say it's because if your faith is not based on any evidence, then the evidence is not what your faith is contingent on. So even if the evidence is false, you're still going to have faith. And to a lot of people, that just sounds like strong faith, but it's not. In fact, I would call it one of the weakest forms of faith. And that is what I call like one of the occupational hazards of having faith that's based on something. The necessary occupational hazard is that if that thing is false, then your faith is false. So then that means you have something to defend. That's not easy, but it's more true. Evidence, I guess, in that case is not optional for Christians. And there's actually somewhere I would go to show that. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 14. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. And if Christ has not been raised, it's verse 17. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. I would ask, does this sound like evidence on which faith is not contingent? No. It sounds like this is evidence, or something that needs to be evidenced, that needs to be in place in order for the Christian faith to be true.
So you're basically saying that, like, if we have to have evidence for our faith, because if it isn't, then it's not true, and none of this has a point. So it's more of like a heavier burden, because we're not just saying, well, I believe it's faith, so it's true. We're saying if this stuff that we're about to talk about, this evidence isn't true, well, then our religion isn't true.
Yeah, and again, that's hard for a lot of people. It's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. That, there are certain conditions that if they were not true, your faith would not be true. But again, just occupational hazards. That's just what we have to deal with.
I have a quote here from Albert Einstein, and then we can get into the postulates unless either of you has something else to say. Okay. The quote from Albert Einstein is, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." Basically, and again, going back to exactly what you're talking about. So, our postulates. They are, 1, we can trust our senses. 2, we can know truth. And 3, truth requires evidence. Regardless of your philosophical stance on these postulates, without them, you cannot survive or have a functioning society. Yes, they are assumptions, but they're necessary assumptions that every human being who has ever lived has made every day of their lives.
And so there are I had written down some kind of implications.
Yeah.
Like, if these postulates were not true,
Yeah.
what would happen? And so the most obvious thing to me is if we say that we can't know truth, and I would say all these postulates are being denied by certain people, more and more. It's becoming kind of popular, I guess you could say, to deny these postulates for some sense of academic superiority, I guess.
Well, it's not a new thing. There was an ancient Chinese philosopher, I can't remember his name, but he lived like nearly 2,000 years ago, and he didn't agree with these postulates. It's not new.
Yeah, but the postulate saying that we can't know truth is false is really a self-defeating statement. Okay, we can't know truth. Okay, fine. Can we know that statement is true or untrue? No. You can't know know that statement is true if you're assuming that you can't know truth.
Yeah, so you're saying if we can know truth, well, how do you know we can know truth?
Yeah,
maybe we can. How do you know?
Yeah, it's a completely self-defeating argument.
So, according to these postulates, right? These postulates say that we can observe the world around us, and we can come to conclusions. And some of those conclusions that we've come to are the fundamental scientific laws of our universe. It's pretty obvious that our universe behaves in consistent, rational ways, and that allows science to occur. Science is just observing the natural world and coming to conclusions about how it works. Some examples of that are Newton's laws of motion, basically describing how things move. The first three describing how things move, and then the fourth talking about gravity. Those are all fundamental, and these are true everywhere in the universe. There's also a concept called thermodynamics. So the first law of thermodynamics says that matter can neither be created or destroyed, right? You don't have random objects popping in and out of existence, all over the place. It's true. And then you have causality. That is that any action that occurs requires a cause that was before it and greater than it.
And kind of to that effect, I would also add Hamilton's principle of least action. This is kind of a weird one. It's a little hard to explain with complete accuracy what this actually is, but basically it's a pattern that was found starting kind of in the early 18th century on, where it appears that just in physics in general, a system will optimize its own trajectory to account for a specific factor called action. Now, it sounds fairly simple, but there really isn't a good way to describe action. It's defined, I believe, as the integral of potential energy over kinetic energy with respect to time.
So in English, what would that be?
I have no idea. The best that I could come up with is action is a way of representing some relationship of the energy in a system over time.
Okay.
But the important part here is that across all of scientific observation, the universe consistently optimizes itself for specific factors, for specific end results, I guess. And so a question you could ask, kind of going back to what you're saying, is why? In a universe that supposedly doesn't exist for any logical or coherent reason, why would you expect the universe to optimize for anything in particular?
Yeah.
Right.
Just the way I've always kind of summed that up is purely naturalistic science is great at explaining what, but by its very nature, it cannot explain why.
Exactly. Also, there's some disagreement about this among the physics world, but it's generally accepted that there are 26 fundamental constants in the universe, specific but abstract values that appear to be the same across the entire universe, and if they were any different, well, the universe would either be fundamentally different, not able to support life, or probably just wouldn't exist at all. Some examples of these that some might be familiar with are the speed of light, the gravitational constant, Avogadro's constant, Planck's constant, elementary charge, Boltzmann's constant, etc. But there are just a bunch of highly specific values that all have to remain the same in order for the universe as we know it to exist.
And how does that make sense in a universe that isn't intelligently designed? Mm-hmm. Again, going back to what I call causality, right? Why does anything exist? Mm-hmm. Purely naturalistic science can't explain that. There's a lot of theories, but you can't prove any of them. We're going to be talking about that some later. Another thing I want to talk about is biogenesis. So you have life is extraordinarily more complicated than things like planets, and there are natural processes that form planets and stars and such, but life, right? It's immensely complex. And if it's, how do you explain how that came to be? There's the second law of thermodynamics. I talked about the first one earlier. It says that everything in the universe trends towards the disorderly. For non-living material to turn itself into even very simple bacteria requires a very chaotic and disorderly system to make a very substantial jump to something that is extremely well ordered. And that just doesn't make sense in a world without a God.
And just to make the point even more clear, like, you can go find very well attested, highly followed scientists who are a part of the new atheism movement, which is something I think we'll talk about later on. But
it's more of a philosophy than a scientific
but
belief system.
Yeah, we can find some of these people. I'm not going to name names for certain reasons. But where it seems like where things are trending now for atheism is a more widespread acceptance of explanations like aliens seeded Earth with life. Which, again, it does not explain anything. It just kicks the can down the road one more step. You know, where did the aliens come from? Well, aliens seeded them. Where did the aliens that seeded us come from?
And I think that it's the same with a lot of those ideas, right? Because like the multiverse, for example, well, the whole idea of the multiverse is you can never prove that you're in the multiverse. So you're just kicking it out to a point where like you can't attain that. Well, who created the multiverse? How did we get to that point? Or with the Big Bang, right? Who put those that ball of matter there? Who caused it?
Who laid the cosmic egg?
Who caused the reaction to go off? Right?
At some point, there has to be an uncaused cause.
Because the way I've always looked at it is you need like a supernatural source to the universe. Because what, like, you know, the Big Bang or all these other things is you're pushing it back. But what a supernatural thing does is it says, okay, well, there's something above the laws of nature that caused this.
Yeah.
Right.
I like to call these things like the multiverse or the alien seeding life on Earth, I call them the gods of atheism because they're appeals to the supernatural. You know, you have this natural phenomenon. We can't explain it through pure science. So we start appealing to the supernatural to explain this phenomenon. I have a list of, I think, 6. Here, we've already talked about some of them. The first one is, it's just an argument that some atheists will use against people who are religious and basically say that, well, that's not scientific. You know, well, if you believe in the argument is, if you believe in a God, well, God and science are inconsistent, so that's because God is supernatural. And science doesn't deal with the supernatural, but
then again, neither does any explanation that actually sufficiently explains the origin of the universe. Like,
yes.
Like, okay, God is not scientific. Okay, so is the multiverse. You know, so are all the other explanations because they transcend what science can know by its very nature.
Yeah, a lot of these arguments are sort of a suspension of disbelief. You know, well, you're not really answering the question. You're just kind of kicking the can back further so that on the surface it seems like you've answered it. Yeah, I have you know, it's just like the argument, well, so why does life on Earth exist if there's no creator? Well, you know, anything's possible in a puddle 3.5 billion years ago. Well, it's not. Puddle's still subject to the same laws of physics we observe today, according to the laws of physics. Why should we expect bacteria to suddenly be popping out of this stuff?
What are some of the other gods? Have we covered all the gods of atheism?
So there's the multiverse, and I have a great quote about the multiverse. There's Big Bang hand waving. Just like, well, we don't know what was happening back during the Big Bang, and I forget who might have said it. It was a prominent physicist, can't remember his name, who said, well, before the Big Bang, the laws of physics were different, and that allows this to happen. But if it's not subject to the laws of physics, then it's supernatural, and it meets the definition of a god, I guess.
It's like, what do you mean the laws of nature were different? Nature didn't exist.
Exactly.
So if you agree that the laws of nature doesn't apply to your origin story, then why you get mad when we try to apply that?
Exactly.
Why do you get mad when we apply that to God?
Another god of atheism that I have is the simulation theory.
That's a fun one.
Yeah. Well, again, it's not scientific because you can never prove it right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. And if it's real or not, wouldn't you want to act like it was? Because if you can never know for sure that it's a simulation, then for all you know, it's real.
Exactly.
So you're banking on this idea that it doesn't matter, I can do whatever I want because this is a simulation, when you have no way of proving that. And then if for some reason, and if, most likely cases you're going to be proven wrong, well, then you're kind of cooked.
Yeah. And you're not actually answering the question either. It's just like, so who made whatever is simulating us? Well, maybe they're living in a simulation. And you just, this infinite regress, and an infinite regress is not an explanation.
Right. No.
Anyway, I have a quote specifically about the multiverse. It's a quote from Discover magazine, specifically talking about the fine-tuning problem, which is what we've been talking about before, where you're talking about there's these physical constants that are always the same, and they're just right for life to exist. The quote is, "We have a lot of really strange coincidences, and all of these coincidences are such that they make life possible. Physicists don't like coincidences. They like even less the notion that life is somehow central to the universe. And yet recent discoveries are forcing them to confront that very idea. Call it a fluke, a mystery, or a miracle. Or call it the biggest problem in physics, short of invoking a benevolent creator. Many physicists see only one possible explanation. Our universe may be one out of perhaps infinitely many universes, in an incredibly vast multiverse. Advocates argue that, like it or not, the multiverse may well be the only viable, non-religious explanation for what is often called the fine-tuning problem."
And that's a phrase you see very often is most plausible, non-religious explanation. Why does that have to be the case?
Well, because religious gods are more plausible.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but why?
Why can't we focus on the most plausible, not the most plausible non-religious?
Instead of the most plausible that does not fit within this certain category.
If for some reason most plausible is something religious, why are we ignoring that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna go out on a limb here, but maybe it's because we don't want to be held down by God, which I know this ain't what this podcast is about, but
there is some personal element to it. There's an emotional element to it as well.
I know that, again, with new atheism, like you were talking about, I've heard of a number of new atheists refer to God as a dictator, right? And they talk about how liberating their philosophy has been, and you're actively ignoring evidence because you don't want it to be true.
Yeah. And so I guess from here we can ask, well, where does all this leave us? Right?
Yeah.
It leaves us with a universe that seems to have intelligent thought put into its design. Also, you could say, at least in my observation, intelligence appears to only arise from previous intelligence.
Yeah.
So again, you have two options here.
Well, because intelligence is the only thing that can counteract entropy.
Yeah.
Entropy, that ties back to the second law of thermodynamics. It's that all systems trend to the disorderly, right? If you have a bunch of stuff and leave it out, it's not going to organize itself into a useful object. It's just going to either do nothing or just continue to disintegrate further. So if you have the prebiotic soup, which I think is what a lot of evolutionary science calls it, on the early Earth, what you're not going to see, you might through random processes get amino acids or something like that, but you're not going to get proteins, much less cells out of it.
And so you're left with two options there. Either infinite regressive intelligence, like we talked about, or singular ultimate intelligence.
Yes.
And again, one thing that I kind of like to say about infinite regresses is it's kind of like linearized circular reasoning, right? Like it's like circular reasoning. It's related to circular reasoning, but it just goes in a line.
Yeah.
It's no better.
Yeah.
So that's where we're left with ultimate, transcendent, intelligent cause.
Yeah.
Or how I would just put it is like the supernatural cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something is above the laws of nature. It's not bound to the same laws of nature that everything else is.
Yeah. The very existence of the natural demands the supernatural.
Exactly.
And this is, in a basic sense, what is meant by God, right? We tend to, or not us, but just people in general, when just thinking about the question, does God exist? There's a mental image of what we're trying to say exist, right? Like, and this is a sentiment that's been pushed forward by, again, new atheism a lot. That is, you're trying to prove whether a bearded man in the sky exists or not. Like, that's, most often, again, it's just mocking, but like, it's a very commonly pushed idea among, the more intense skeptics.
Yeah.
But that's not what is meant by the Christian God.
And that's not what is meant by any God that can plausibly answer
Yeah.
the question about the existence of, well, anything.
Yeah, it's not a God in the sense of the, anthropomorphized, pagan gods, right? And I think you can actually see this in the Bible, like very early on. Like in Exodus, when God tells Moses, go, deliver my people from Egypt, Moses asks, he asks God, well, what is your name? And he says, Yehovah, I am.
I think we're starting to get into the territory of our second episode. So if we want to call it here and then come back and
Absolutely.
start
But
up again.
I think the main thing is we've proven that some type of supernatural being, force, or what we would say God, is what's the most likely reason and, like, what's the word, like, designer?
Yeah.
Almost. I don't know if I can use that word, but, like, the reason we're here, our creator, is some type of supernatural thing. And so because of that, well, if there's a supernatural being that created us, then we should probably be very concerned about, like, what that is.
Yes.
Who that is, and, like, if we need to do anything because of that. Because, like, if you think about, like, this, for example, when you if you create a video game like NPC and they don't do what you want them to do, where you're gonna be mad at them. You might delete them. You might, like, in villagers in Minecraft, they're annoying, and you often want to just kill them if they're being annoying, right? But if there's a higher power to us that has created us, for one thing, we're totally theirs. And so that means that we have to, we should be obeying them because they're ours. But then also, there's almost a little bit of fear in that, because if we don't do what he's doing, what that supernatural being wants us to do, well, then he might be mad at us. And that might cause, that could be very bad. So what we're going to do in the next 2 episodes is narrow down into who is that God, and then, of course, what he wants from us. Because that's ultimately the most important question you're ever going to ask in life.
And I think just to kind of conclude this episode, there's a an explanation in, not really an explanation, but an argument in philosophy called Occam's razor that basically says the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. And I don't think that a God is necessarily even just the simplest explanation. It's the only explanation, as we've seen from the evidence.
Anything else, y'all?
I think that's it.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us in the very first episode of Rigorous Religion. Our second episode is going to be a little bit longer, but I think it's going to be a lot better. And of course, make sure you like, you subscribe, you do all those things. We're not going to ask that every single episode, but since this is our first, of course, we got to ask you that. And we're going to be on Spotify, probably like Apple Podcasts and a couple other like audio only. And of course, we're going to have a YouTube for if you want to watch video. It's going to be very good video if you're watching online on audio only. And then also, we'll probably put down below a thing that says our email address. And so if you want to email us, if you have any questions, concerns, you think we're wrong, you can do it that way. Or, of course, if you just want to leave it in the YouTube comments, we're going to reach out to you and we're going to do our best to answer any questions you have or any concerns. If you think we're wrong, then just tell us that we're wrong. But with that, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.